Well, good evening, everyone. We're delighted to be in your living rooms and to be here at the Patten Free Library. This invitation came before Christmas to us, and it's really been a wonderful excuse for us to revisit this wonderful trip we took in May 2018 to Southern Africa. Dan and I are going to split the program tonight, and we'll share some observations together and be happy to answer questions at the end. We traveled with a travel agency group that we've traveled with before, Overseas Adventure Travel, OAT, which makes a point of not only showing you interesting geography and sites, but getting involved with the people and the culture of the countries you visit. And for us, I think the real highlight of this trip was getting to know some of the natives and respecting how well they're doing and their future lying ahead. So there were 14 people in our group, and we flew ourselves to Amsterdam for a day and overnight, and then flew and met our group in Johannesburg. I think you're looking at a map, which we'll show several times during the presentation. But if you see the arrow, the red arrow going up in the middle of the screen, that shows the first flight we took, which was from Johannesburg to Victoria Falls. Victoria Falls is in Zimbabwe, and the falls splits Zambia to the north and Zimbabwe to the south. So I'm going to be talking about Zimbabwe and Zambia, and then Dan's going to take over with more pictures and information about Botswana. So the first place, after we landed in Victoria Falls, we were met by our wonderful tour director, and her name is Tambi, and she lives in Victoria Falls. She's a woman in her early 40s, wonderful, informative, kind, and good at herding cats, which our group sometimes became. And here's Tembi sitting on her front porch, which we will visit in Dan's part of the presentation. And she's surrounded by two of our tour members. So Tambi had a bus arranged for us to drive down to Hwange National Park. The national parks in these countries are game reserves. There's no hunting allowed. And with that in mind, the animals are relatively accustomed to seeing Land Rovers, where the way we travel, and we get up and close and personal in a way you'll see soon. So we went down to the park headquarters and then transferred into two Land Rovers with a driver and a guide. And this is late afternoon as the sun was getting lower in the sky. We drove about an hour into our tent camp, and soon after this photo, a group of elephants crossed over the road in front of us, and we had to stop for a moment and let them go by. This is the tent that served as our bedroom and bathroom. There's in each of the camps we visited, we had separate sleeping accommodations with bathrooms, and then common dining rooms and living rooms, which you'll see in a moment. This was the dining room in the first tent camp in Zimbabwe. And here's the living room and bar. There's a fire pit here, and in the evening we could gather here for cocktails. And if you look in the back there, you'll see that there are other visitors to this tent camp. Commonly, they're a group of elephants who are there in the savannah right beyond the camp. And there's a swimming pool in this camp. At night, the elephants come and join us for drinks in the swimming pool. Now, the day on safari starts early. The animals are active in the early morning and later in the afternoon. So we typically were awakened in the dark, dressed, went in for a quick breakfast, and then set off by 6 o'clock in the morning to see what animals we could find. So the first group of animals that we saw were zebras, and they're quite common in this area of Zimbabwe. And here's a mother and colt. And if you look over to the right in this scene, my right in this scene, you'll see there's another animal peeking up through the grass, and it's none other than that famous handsome warthog, which we saw a number of in our travels. Nearby was the carcass of a dead elephant. We could smell it from afar, as could the animals in that area. And among those animals, we encountered this lady lion who has a radio collar where they can keep track of where she is. And this perhaps was her sister lion with 3 cubs, and they had all been eating on the elephant carcass. Next, we met from afar, happily, a Cape buffalo. Now, these critters are among the most aggressive and dangerous animals. In this part of Africa, they talk about the big 5 animals, which is the Cape buffalo, the elephant, the lion, the leopard, and the rhinoceros. And we were fortunate in seeing a lot of all of those animals, but for the rhinoceros, which is increasingly rare. This is a cheetah, which had come to the watering hole for a drink. And then it was slinking away back into the savanna. Lots of giraffes and lots of acacia trees, which the leaves of which are a favorite snack for giraffes, and they're easy for them to reach. These are wildebeests whose manes could be trimmed or not. And now we're at another watering hole. The bird life in all this part of Africa is really astounding. There are hundreds of different kinds of birds and difficult to keep them all straight. But there are herons, which are here. Storks. And storks. Thank you, Dan. And this is another watering hole out beyond us. The typical schedule gave us a break about 9:30 or 10 in the morning, and the staff would have coffee and sweets, pastries, and the like, and we could get out and safely walk around. Otherwise, this safari was quite confined. You didn't go for walks because the animals were everywhere and unpredictable. You'll see the windmill in the back here, which pumps up water as needed in the dry season. Now, some other visitors to this watering hole. If you've ever wondered how a giraffe gets a drink of water, this is a good picture because he's spread eagle in the front, those long legs, and to bend over to get his head down into the water. There's also an old bull elephant who is curious to see what we're doing. And when bull elephants feel themselves threatened, they add a 5th leg. And if you can see, he has extended his penis in a very aggressive way, wondering what we'll be up to. And then it's retracted when he realizes that we're no danger. These are impala that are a very, very common deer-like critter in this part of the world. These are all ladies. And these are, we used to call these the toilet seat. They're water bucks. And everyone joked that someone had painted toilet seats and the water bucks sat down on them and hence had that ring around their tails. And you'll see more zebras there. These critters get along together nicely. This is a termite mound, which is very common. These are ostrich. The males have black feathers, the females gray. And here's an impala male, excuse me, that is hiding behind this other termite mound. Beautiful animals. On our way back, this was an afternoon trip. On our way back, we came by this pond and saw 2 heads peeking out. And you'll probably guess, if your vision is good, that we're seeing a mother and a child hippo. The hippo child was very curious about us and walked out of the pond, gave us a side view with mama in the background, ready to roar if need be. It was fun to see these guys up close. This man was one of our major tour guides, Elliot, and right before we went back for dinner, we would have a cocktail hour on the savannah, and he's preparing either mixed drinks or wine, red or white, whatever you'd like. And it was a nice closing to the day in the savannah. And the sun's going down. They were pretty short days. We're in the southern hemisphere. This is fall. And once the sun drops down, it's cold in the morning and the night. Now, these people, the staff at all the camps we visited, were enormously friendly and greeted us with music, drumming, singing, and dancing. And on the last night we spent at each of the camps, the staff would put on a little entertainment for us and then ask us to reciprocate. So this is Elliot and some of the other staff dancing. And then they said, okay, it's your turn, to our group of travelers. And what could we do? Well, the only thing that quickly came to mind was our old favorite, the hokey pokey. And so the group of us you see in this picture, well, we're moving, I think, mostly women, 3 or 4 men, engaged in the hokey pokey, just like we were in 3rd grade. And they liked it. The staff thought it was a kick. The next day, we drove back up toward Victoria Falls and stopped at a truck stop. These trucks were likely going through Zambia on the way to the Congo. And these guys needed refreshments. So here's the roadside stand with a woman cooking and her helper in the kitchen cleaning the pots and pans. Notice the pretty fabrics that these women wear. They rarely wear slacks of any sort. They're usually in long sarong kind of skirts and tops. Our next stop was at a village. They expected our visit. And here are the ladies of the village and children welcoming us. And look at the variety of patterns and colors. They all wear scarves. And now and then we would see an American t-shirt, but typically this was the costume that they wore. There was only one man we're going to meet in a minute here, the head chief here. Most of the men were away working, leaving the women and children here in the village. And these adorable children. There's the head man who sat with us and described life in the village. These ladies welcomed us into their home. These are thatched roofs, and we took turns peeking in to see what the inside of these huts would be like, and we were quite astounded to see quite a complicated sound system on that break front, a photograph of a lion, and the thatched roof and plaid sofa. I especially like this picture. These 2 young mothers had gathered firewood, and instead of backpacks, they have these babies strapped to their backs with more fabric. This little guy I could have put in my suitcase to bring home, but I didn't. Then these ladies were pounding corn. You can see behind is a dry cornfield, making corn meal the old way. So this lady was pounding corn there, but isn't she lovely? And beautiful headdress and beautiful skin. They prepared snacks for us, and these are like baby birds that had been sauteed.
I think they're adults.
You think they're adults? They're songbirds, I think, and only Dan was bold enough to take a taste, not to refuse their hospitality, but I was not tempted. The next visit we made was to a primary school nearby. These are private schools. They're not run by the government in Zimbabwe. And here, this lady is the principal and teacher at this primary school. There's Tembe in the background wearing a dress because we're going into town. Here's the classroom. And if you notice on the wall, there are photographs of Martin Luther King Jr. and George Washington. These children are all learning English, and they were very friendly. And each of them, after we visited the schoolrooms, came out and took one of us travelers by the hand to tour us around their gardens in the area of the school. And here's my hostess, this cute little girl. I think these kids are about 10 years old, 10 or 12 years old. And she was really lovely. They're very poor and supplies are in great demand. And you'll see this is another little girl in her uniform, or what's left of it. Our group OAT contributes to the support of the school, and we all did after visiting here. Now we're back to the map for a minute. So you'll see we've driven up from Hwange National Park to Victoria Falls. And our next stop is in Zambia. And to get to Zambia, we have to fly. Here is the airstrip in Zambia where we landed. And now we're in a Zambian national park, Kafue. This is the Kafue River, and we got on boats to come down to the second tent camp and unload at the dock there on the left. This is the main living area, lodge of the camp. Here's the dining room. The food was excellent, was well prepared, and pretty Western in style. This is the tent camp that Dan and I occupied, and it was right on the river. The porch was right there by the river. There were all kinds of monkeys who represented a danger in that they were happy to enter your camp and help themselves to whatever they could find. The first night we slept in that tent, we heard a racket outside and something eating. It sounded like grazing in the grass. And in the morning, when we looked out, we found these enormous footprints. And of course, it was hippos, or a hippo, who had come up out of the river to graze in our front yard. These two men on the outside are guides, and the man in the middle is a military man who has a rifle with him. There's a problem with hunters coming in primarily looking for elephants to shoot for their ivory. And this man is patrolling against poachers. We walked in single file down through this path up on a hillside, but I discovered in the path something to look at, and it was lion poop. And we could tell that, said the guide, because there was so much fur. We're not sure what the lion had for dinner the night before, but he left some of it here on the trail for us. So we walked up this hill for the view, which was very nice. And then had lectures occasionally, which taught us about the country, its politics somewhat, and the animals that we'd be seeing and the issues for the country. And of course, there's Tembe again. There she is again. These ladies talked about the fabrics that they wore and gave us instructions about how to make our own skirts and how to make our own scarves. And Dan and I really liked this picture of this woman who was very attractive. That night, we had a farewell to do. You see the drummers and the dancers. We didn't do the hokey pokey here, but we had a nice evening. And the next day, we went back up to the airport. And on the way, we had to slow down because of this traffic jam with a pride of lions. And there's the old man and his lady friends. It was a beautiful animal. And they went off in the grass. Then we came back down, and Dan's going to take over. You see on the map, we were in Kafue and the Kafue River, and we flew back down to Livingstone, which is on the border there. So.
Okay, so here I am. I just want to say Zambia its northern neighbor is the Republic of the Congo. So it really is quite in the center. It's sort of south central Africa. All three of these countries that we visited, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Botswana, are landlocked. To the east of Zimbabwe is Mozambique, and to the sort of the northwest of Botswana and west of Zambia is Namibia and Angola. And of course, to the south is South Africa. So, as Linda said, we flew back from Kafue National Park to Livingston. We got on a bus and we are headed now into Botswana. So instead of going across the Zambezi River there over to Victoria Falls, we took a bus over to what you can see as Kasane. And there we crossed the Zambezi River, but there was no bridge. So we had to take a ferry. So, before we left Livingstone, we stopped at this market, which you often do with the Haute Travels. And I just think it's remarkable, the appearance of the people, how beautiful they are and well-dressed. And you could buy everything from food to hardware to clothing and pots and pans at this market. These were actually fried worms and other kind of insects that are quite common. Because it's a small ferry over this river, and because there's a lot of truck traffic going between, particularly the Congo and northern Zambia, where there are copper mines, down to ports in South Africa, there's a lot of trucks going back and forth. And because it's just one or maybe two small ferries that can take one or two trucks at a time, it's quite a backup. And the truck drivers can spend a number of days waiting to get across. It's become somewhat of a red light district here, actually. You notice this HIV is real, choose abstinence. And the HIV threat and scourge of Southern Africa has abated somewhat in the last 20 to 25 years, since the pharmaceutical companies have been able to allow generic HIV treatment to be readily available, and doctors have been taught how to administer it. But it's still something that people take warning of, and there are a lot of orphanages because of the HIV problem. This was a truck driver from the Congo who was headed down to Durban, South Africa, and waiting his turn to get across the river. And he told us some of his stories. And, you know, it's just wonderful to meet these kinds of people. Actually, we didn't take the ferry. We took this little boat. We had there were 14 of us, so it went back and forth twice. Got to the other side. The river's in flood. I don't know whether you can see in the background, in the middle of the river is a dugout canoe of some guy coming across. But these people have come across, and behind them is a truck, but I don't show that here. Because of the flooding of the Zambezi River, which originates in, some people said, close to where the Nile originates. And it's one of the larger rivers in Africa. But the camp we were headed for had been flooded. We couldn't get to it. So instead we stayed in this, closer to, we were at, I didn't show you on the map, but this Chobe, C-H-O-B-E National Park. Let me just see. You see, we came across into Kasane, across the river, and then Chobe National Park is right there. And we stayed in a beautiful resort type hotel. That was our bedroom. And nearby, cleaning up the grass, was a warthog, which seemed to be totally acceptable for this resort. The river is in flood. You can see across where flooding is Namibia, actually. And we took a boat trip up the river, upstream from our camp, and looked at the local animals along the riverbank. And here's a crocodile, not an alligator. And I like this picture. You can see a heron out daintily going out into the water, and these are Egyptian geese looking, but they're all being observed carefully by a character on the right there in the water, a crocodile. We were worried we might see some bloodshed, but it didn't happen. Here's a Cape buffalo, a pod of hippopotamuses, one of which is up getting some grass, a giraffe looking out over the bushes nearby. And as we returned to the camp for supper, the sun was going down and we were having another typical beautiful evening in Africa. Next morning, we took a Land Rover out. We went by this kind of mud hole, and this was filled with some Cape buffalo and a single stork. And this guy really looked like he was having fun in the mud. Cape buffalo. This is a crowned lapwing, which is related to the plover, actually, and pretty common in South Africa, but quite a remarkable looking character. Baboons were pretty common all over the place. This is a lilac-breasted Rollo, and this is a red-beaked hornbill. And that's elephant dung, which is a good place to sort of find something more to eat. A guinea hen, very common on the savanna. These are carmine bee catchers, and they were just filling this old dead tree. And speaking of trees, this is a very common, or at least frequent tree in all over Africa, as I understand it, and maybe even Australia. But they're called baobab, and they're a very old tree. This tree probably is 1,000 years old, and they can be twice that. They also are called upside down trees because the branches look almost like a root system. They have a very thick bark, and they can store water and can be a lifesaver for the Bushmen out on the Kalahari Desert. Oh, I hit the wrong button, but here we are. This is another male impala. And here are a couple of impala males duking it out a little bit. This is another deer-like animal called a puku. Didn't see a lot of them, but a few. And here's an elephant mother with her baby, obviously pretty cute. And this fellow, probably an older brother, because he wasn't that old, came up very close to us and was kind of curious to looking at us. This is an eagle. It's called an African fish eagle. And nearby on a tree is a vulture, and of course, a very important character on the savanna. This is a jackal, a black backed jackal. We saw a number of them. This is a hawk with his breakfast in his talon. This is a grounded hornbeak. I don't quite know why it gets that name, but pretty colorful. And this is a mongoose, a banded mongoose, and didn't expect to see one of those in Africa. And after lunch, and after our tour on the savannah, I walked up into Kasane, the town. Now, we didn't talk much about these three countries, but they're all quite different. I said that Zambia was formerly called Northern Rhodesia, and Zimbabwe was Southern Rhodesia. Zimbabwe, all of these countries got their independence in about the mid-60s from the British, who were their protectorates. Zambia was taken over actually by a group of white settlers, and it was called Southern Rhodesia. But there was no Southern Rhodesia. And then after a guerrilla warfare with Robert Mugabe as the chief in 1980, they took over running the country. And Mugabe remained an authoritarian leader of Zimbabwe until 2017. And they've suffered tremendously with economic and inflation and high unemployment rates. Whereas Botswana, which is just to the west, became an independent state from England in 1965. Its president, last name was Kwan. The movie United Kingdom, which is mentioned in the things to see, is a wonderful story about this man who was the son of the major chief there in central Botswana. He went to Oxford, fell in love, and married a white woman in England, and they came back to, and he was elected president eventually. But it's quite a story. Any rate, as a result of this kind of situation, Botswana has been one of the more, in fact, the best, longest living democratic country in all of Africa. And their standard of living reflects that. Whereas in Zimbabwe, the per capita income is $2,500. In Botswana, it is $19,000. And tourism, of course, is important to them. So is diamond mining, and interestingly, cattle production. They have quite a lot of cattle herds. So here's the town of Kasane. There's a Woolworths in Kasane. There's an ATM, the bank, Gaborone. Gaborone is the capital down closer to the South African border. And a supermarket, which really is quite remarkable to see people in sort of a normal looking supermarket. In fact, this lady seems to have the newspaper with the best buys to get. So after our visit to this camp, we took our fourth camp, was in the Okavango Delta. You see the dotted line, red dotted line, and going down to the left and lower area that leads to the Okavango Delta. The Okavango Delta is made up of a delta of a river called the Okavango River. The Okavango, as well as the Chobe River up in Kasane, originate in Angola, in the mountains of Angola. And although the Chobe River joins into the Zambezi to drain into the Indian Ocean, the Okavango drains into the Kalahari Desert, which makes up most of central and really most of Botswana. It's a high, dry grassland, which was the homeland for the Bushmen of Botswana, a very old group of Homo sapiens. But at any rate, because of the fact that the river drains right into this dry area, you get this delta. And this is a satellite view of the Okavango Delta coming down from Angola. And this is what it looks like from our airplane coming in. And you can see one of the tributaries of the Okavango in the marshlands around it. We land at a strip close to the camp. You can see an elephant in the background, and he's just happily munching, but sometimes they can be right on the runway. So the pilots have to be very careful before they commit to landing on a runway. You get to the camp, and here are the staff welcoming us with a little song and dance. This is the sort of the dining area, gathering area, overlooking the marsh and the river here, with a cocktail bar up to the left up these steps. And this is our cabin. Has the canvas sides to it, but a metal roof. And again, it's about 100 yards away from the central area. We're right near the marsh and the river. You can hear the hippopotamuses groaning during the night. That's the inside with the canvas walls, and that's our bathroom. That afternoon, late afternoon before supper, we got a ride on these dugout canoes, ending up at a spot for cocktails and observing the hippopotamus, which was in this particular part of the river, who came up and gave us a little roar just for our interest. And then the sun went down, and we made our way back to our camp, had dinner. The next morning, we're out into the Okavango in a Land Rover. This is an African wild dog, which are getting somewhat rare, we're told, drinking at a watering hole. And then along the road, we had to stop and let the elephants get their drinking. We spent about 20 minutes here. It was really wonderful to see these guys drinking and enjoying themselves. A good hind end view. And this fellow also seemed to be a little excited, as you can see by his fifth leg. Quite an old fellow. Nearby was a hippopotamus with some birds taking a free ride. And then we came upon this animal, one of the big five. And can you tell us what that is, class? Well, if you get a better view, you go off to the side a little bit, and there he is, a leopard. And it was the only leopard we saw. But this is typically where you find them, resting up in a tree. They'll often, well, they'll get a kill like an impala, and they'll pull it up in the tree and eat it for a number of days, right there in the tree. This is a kingfisher. This is a starling. And another ground fowl with a red beak. And boy, isn't this something? This is a saddled stork, a saddle-billed stork on his or her nest. And as we drove by, we found a group of men setting up a campsite. And so some people, when they go on safari, stay in tents that are set up for them by staff at different sites. And these men were setting up a site overlooked by these baboons. And again, we went by a pool or a pond, and here was a group of English people, young people, who had gotten their Land Rover taken down to Nairobi and were headed for Cape Town. So they were about halfway there and spent the night in the jungle. This isn't jungle, is it? It's the savannah on the way down. But to be alone like that out in the middle of the savannah is something. The next day, we took another trip across this bridge into another part of the Delta to a town called Kauai. This is the Delta. Along the way, we saw lion tracks overlapping car tracks or truck tracks. And here's Kauai. And this is the town of Kauai, or the village of Kauai. And this gentleman's named Face, F-A-C-E. He was our guide from our camp, and he lives in Kauai. And this is the sort of the community center town hall. And then there was a pediatric clinic going on, and the gal up next to the man checking people in is Margaret Morris, who's a lifetime friend of Linda and me, and she's a retired pediatrician. And here's the mother and children waiting to see the doctor. And the kids, they just love to have their picture taken, and they love to smile. It's just amazing. And there's Face with the kids getting them to hold their hands up for us. You can see our truck that we were in behind us. A little girl looking things over. And this is Face's cousin, and she asked me if I would take her picture and then send her a copy of the picture, which I've done. This is certainly a lovely young woman. And here's Face's other business interest. It's the Kauai Shopping Center, which he owns. He sells cold beer and liquor. And inside he sells Texas corned meat and vegetables and tuna fish. And I don't know how he does it, but he's quite an entrepreneur. And then we visited his family. And this is where his mother and dad sleep at night. And this is Linda speaking with her dad, who's a retired engineer who built roads around Botswana. And you notice his looks. I think he's the Bushman, kind of a little bit lighter and kind of a wiry physique and wiry hair, which I see is typical of the Bushmen of the Kalahari Desert. And there's his mother showing us some of her work on a plaque. And that's the homestead. And now we're heading back up to Victoria Falls, and there's some fresh elephant dung right in front of us. This is all of us with Tembi on the left side there. So we flew from Okavango Delta back up to Victoria Falls. This is again the Delta as we're leaving. And here are the falls. We're looking south, actually. So right underneath us is the town of Livingstone, which is in Zambia. And to the other side, the upper part of the picture is Victoria Falls, which is in Zimbabwe. And there's the falls, the Victoria Falls of the Zambezi River. You can see it's about a mile long and about 350 foot deep. said to be the largest waterfalls in the world. And you can see it's carved a gorge over the hundreds of thousands of years. We had a kind of a typical, as Linda said, we had pretty standard food at most of the camps we visited, but here we're having a typical African dinner. So it was kind of fun to do that. And these are actually fried caterpillars that we had as part of the lunch. And then we took a walk along the falls. And I said the falls, Victoria Falls, it was first visualized by a European and named in 1855 by Sir David Livingstone, who was a Scottish physician who, and a congregational missionary who spent most of his life, and he died in Africa. It was, of course, he that had disappeared for a while and was found by a New York reporter named Stanley. And when he found Dr. Livingstone, he said, "Dr. Livingstone, I presume." And it's a beautiful sight to see the water as the river was in full flood. So there was quite a lot of water and quite a lot of mist coming up. In fact, you can see the mist from everywhere in that area. One of the names that the natives have for this is called thunder that smokes. The thunder and the smoke coming up, and they gave you these raincoats to stay. And there is Mr. Livingstone. Now we're passing through town. We stopped at this old person's home. Chimbatimba is the name that the natives give to the town itself. And this nursing home was supported by the local Rotary Club. And this lady is one of the residents washing their clothes. Nearby was a barber with his customer. This is a political ad, a little different from what we might see. The politics, and I won't go into it now, but it's quite tricky there in Zimbabwe. And Tembe, in fact, would not talk about politics. And when we were in either Zambia or Zimbabwe, it was only when we were in Botswana that she felt free to discuss how the political system is going, which is not terribly well. We went by this grammar school, and here is the teacher with some of her students. Pencils seem to be a big thing for these kids, and smiles. And this is my favorite picture. Right here is this young man. And then we went to Timby's home, which is in the neighborhood. Her kitchen had a garden outside, and here is her living room. This is her minister and the minister's wife on the wall of her living room. And this is a picture of her mother and her two children, son and daughter. And she showed me her family genealogy, that she's descended from a major chief, which I'm not surprised. She was an impressive woman. After lunch, we took after a bit, Linda and I went down to go across the bridge ourselves. And there was a long line of trucks waiting to get across. The bridge was built in 1904 by Cecil Rhodes, who you've heard of, the Rhodes Scholarship. And he was a major figure at the turn of the century in South Africa. But the bridge only takes one truck one way or the other, and there's a railroad track across it as well. And here's one of the trucks, cargo to Congo. There was an elephant along the way going across the road, and here's the entrance to the bridge, our view of the river from the bridge. Here's the border into Zambia going across the bridge, and you can see a truck coming across toward us. This gentleman from Zambia wanted to take a picture of us holding his little girl. Well, his wife did, so we agreed, and here he is in the background, and I'm not sure she was a happy camper, but. And then we got back to our hotel, having lunch, and Tembe introduced us to her son and her nephew, who's almost like a son for her. And this is my last picture of these two boys who are finishing high school and heading for college. So and I think they represent what I hope to be the future of Zimbabwe and all of Africa. I think it's a the people there are deserving of really a lot of help and support from us. Thank you.